host, Todd Lewis from the Praise of Folly podcast. Tonight, I will not be joined by Brock, as he's been with me from the first two episodes, but by Fritz Ritter, a friend of mine who I met on another live stream. And tonight, we're going to discuss the bloody history of atheism. Within the Western New Atheist tradition, primarily in England and America, there's this kind of fairy tale that atheism is generally peaceful and rational, and that it's these dirty religious people that get involved in these nasty wars. Now, in my previous podcast, I dealt with the wars of religion and the Crusades, so I'm not going to bring that up here. But tonight's podcast will be to discuss the bloody history of atheism. Now, to hedge our bets at the beginning here, we're going to hear, well, they weren't really atheists. And of course, as the atheists are so fond of calling out Christians for the no true Scotsman fallacy, that itself is the most blatant no true Scotsman fallacy. Vladimir Lenin said in 1905 that our propaganda necessarily includes the propaganda of atheism. The publication of the appropriate scientific literature, which the autocratic feudal government has hitherto strictly forbidden and persecuted, must now form one of the fields of our party work. And Marx says, that's Lenin as well. I've got some quotes from Marx about atheism that is also interesting. He says that communism begins from the outset with atheism, but atheism is far from being communism. Indeed, that atheism is still mostly an abstraction. So what Marx is saying is, look, I mean, we have atheists that aren't communists. We got libertarians and anarchists, but communists are atheists. So, and Trotsky also, which I don't have it right now, writes that much like the new atheists, you should consistently attack, mock, and destroy religious believers. And we see that manifest in the League of the Militant Godless. So before we get into the deeper historical content, what are your thoughts on that, Fritz?
Well, I think I would agree with a lot. I think that a lot of the new atheists, I don't think they intentionally would support the militant sort of state atheism, but I would think that given enough power, given enough time, they would. Like, I don't necessarily think that a person like, say, Sargon or the Armored Skeptic are inherently invested in outlawing religion, but I definitely think that that would be an end result if the new atheists were to come to power.
Yeah. So the first manifestation of political atheism, state terrorist atheism, is seen in the French Revolution. Now, the French Revolution, in its anti-clerical phase, was an admixture of deism and atheist tendencies. But the one of the most important things to focus on at this point is the atrocities that occurred in the Vendée. The Vendée is a region in France south of Brittany and north of Anjou, and so it borders the Atlantic coast. And in that region was a hotbed of Catholic resistance and royalist resistance to the Central Directory, which was essentially, anti-clerical, atheistic, deist in its mentality. And it basically issued a complete and utter genocide of the population of the Vendée, which between maybe 200 and 250,000 people were killed. General Westermann said to the convention in December of 1793, "There's no more Vendée. It died under the saber along with its women and children. I have just buried it in the swamps and the woods of Savenay. I have crushed the children under the hooves of our horses, massacred the women. They at least will not give birth to any more brigands. I have not even one prisoner to reproach for myself for. I have exterminated everyone. We take no prisoners, for we would have to give them the bread of liberty, and pity is not revolutionary." Now, that last phrase, "pity is not revolutionary," is so key to understanding political atheism. Whether it's in Lenin's Russia or Mao's China, the idea of pity is completely banned from the thinking of the atheist revolutionary, the atheist Marxist revolutionary. The whole point is to, in fact, Lenin once said, I'm paraphrasing, that the only things that are moral are those things that advance the revolution, and those things that are immoral are those things that hinder the revolution. And we see right here, when you fundamentally deny Christian charity and Christian values that we see in the Gospels, that you have this inversion of ethics, where now what is once forbidden is mandated, and what is once mandated is forbidden.
Well, Yeah, I mean, the fact is, these atheist revolutionaries, they're ideologues. They're total ideologues, and the fact is, Christianity, religion itself, presents such a massive challenge to their entire worldview that they can't help but be extremely anti-theistic and anti-religion and crush any sort of religious opposition to them, because that presents the biggest threat. Because what they have is a worldview. They have a narrative. They have a way of explaining how the world works and why all the problems in the world exist the way they do. And so when you have religion saying, well, no, we have an alternative view of this. We believe that there is a higher power that does have a hand in the world, that did create the world, that there is a meaning to life. This is completely incompatible with any atheistic worldview, be it Marxism or be it the revolutionary French.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Fritz, you saw my first video on this about atheist philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
See, the reason why atheism tends to this direction is that atheism its ontology is nominalism. Nothing is actually real on the atheist account of reality. They can't give an account of how anything is real. Now, while John Locke may or may not have been an atheist, his epistemology laid the foundations for modern-day atheism by denying the distinction between accidental and essential properties. Aristotle argued that objects had two kinds of properties: accidental properties that were extrinsic to the thing as it was. It may, if you lose your hair, you're still Fritz. You haven't changed who you are. But if you were a dog, that would be a fundamental change in who you are. Locke said that humans could never get to or reach the ultimate essence of a thing. And that reduces it to nominalism, where there's no categories of thought, there's no human nature, there's no essences, and it's just this whatever you feel like, whatever you want to make it out to be.
I mean, the thing is, I think that's quite ironic for the atheists to be, that they always claim that theists are claiming everything on the basis of faith, that, well, we just believe that to be true. Whereas if they believe that there is no meaning to anything, if nothing can be assuredly believed to be real, everything they have to do is based on an assumption that it's real.
Exactly, an assumption that they can't actually justify.
Mm-hmm. They can only kind of, they have to assume only based on the concept of, due to the fact that it's expedient to them. They can't go around, because you can't go through life just accepting that nothing is real, that there is no actual objective reality, because you would go completely insane. You have to just, for the sake of being reasonable, for the sake of being able to interact with your surroundings, you have to at least assume, even temporarily, that there is a reality, that you're living in something that is objectively true.
Yeah, exactly. See, once you deny the moral law, if you have a dispute with an individual, you can resolve it in one of two ways: peacefully or violently. And peaceful resolutions can only occur if there's some sort of agreement between the two parties. Now, atheists, as a philosophy and as a political movement, deny absolute objective morality. Ergo, there's no possible appeal I could make to you that we could agree on other than that of force, that I have a bigger stick or a bigger gun than you do. And this is in part why we see this fanatical terrorism in state-sponsored atheism.
I mean, yeah. Again, it goes back to the fact that they express the same or the worst tendencies of the religions they bash all the time. I mean, they claim religious people are they're too dogmatic, they're too much following an ideology, and so that justifies them doing anything. Yet they do the exact same thing. When the atheists were given power, they did the exact same thing. Oh, you're not an atheist? Well, then you're part of the out group. We're going to basically make your life miserable, if not outright kill you.
Well, exactly. The next, well, actually, before we move on to the Russian Revolution, some of the other atrocities committed by the French Republic during that phase, there was accounts of them filling women's breasts with gunpowder and then lighting the match. There were also accounts of them drowning priests in rivers. Unspeakable atrocities. I mean, something like, I don't know, 400,000 or 500,000 people were killed in the Reign of Terror and the Vendée combined. I mean, that's an unimaginable amount of people being killed in such a short amount of time. No matter how corrupt Louis the 14th and 15th and 16th may have been, they never killed 500,000 people in 2 years. That just boggles the mind that they could have even wanted to do that.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it's also, you get a sense during the French Revolution, during the Republic phase, that there was a sense of hysteria because they weren't necessarily completely atheistic, but they basically just made up their own religion. They said, all right, we're going to have our, wasn't it like they were worshiping some sun god or?
The goddess of reason.
Yeah. And then like they wanted to make up their own new dates and make up a new calendar. And, you can see the fact that there was an ideological split with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, because if you just look at the propaganda promoted by everybody else, there's a great early political cartoon made in Britain showing the difference between English and French, between English and French morality. And it explicitly states that French morality, as it's expressed in the French Republic right now during the Revolution, is atheistic, whereas British morality is defined by religion. And you even had the fact that when Napoleon invaded Russia, because Napoleon, he was somewhat more sympathetic to the Catholics. He seemed to be more pragmatic rather than ideological. The fact is, when he invaded Russia, there was this immense appeal to the religion of Russia. People actually thought that Tsar Alexander was some sort of divine or sacred, was a holy being. And you can even in the cultural work, Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, there's a huge amount of religious themes in it, even though it's primarily about the struggle between the French and the Russians during the Napoleon's invasion of Russia. The fact that it starts out with like kind of peasants. It ends, it has the crescendo of La Marseillaise getting louder and louder and louder, showing the advance of Napoleon. But then you have this very slow and quiet kind of prayer of the Russians, an appeal to God to save Russia. And so this kind of devoutly religious theming, I think, plays into the ideological struggle of the French Revolution, that it pitted this atheistic deist worldview that was originally promoted by many thinkers of the Enlightenment against the kind of Christian Catholic worldview of the ancient regime.
Yeah, there's actually a good point to be made here. There's a kind of rational, pragmatic political atheism as embodied by Napoleon and Mussolini, who both cut deals with the Catholic Church, and the fanatical millenarial atheism of the French Republic, the Soviet Union, and Communist China.
I mean, even at the end of his life, there's a quote from Napoleon saying, it almost seems like he actually may have been Christian at the end of his life, because he expressed that, he actually explicitly stated something about the divinity of Jesus.
Oh, is that, you talk about the statement where he said, Christ is, people around the world, all over the world, are willing to die for Christ at this moment. And he says that no other man today or in the history has ever commanded such loyalty. So Christ is not a man. I think that was a paraphrasing of that statement. Is that what you're thinking of? Yeah, is that what you're thinking of, Fritz?
Sorry, I was muted. I have a quote here, actually. It's from 1820, and he says, "I know men, and I tell you that Jesus Christ is not a man. Superficial minds see a resemblance between Christ and the founders of empires and the gods of other religions. That resemblance does not exist. There is between Christianity and what other religions the distance of infinity. The Bible is no mere book, but a living creature with the power to conquer all that oppose it. Time, the great destroyer, is powerless to extinguish this sacred flame. Time can neither exhaust its strength nor put a limit to its range. This is what strikes me most. I have often thought of it. This proves to me quite convincingly the divinity of Jesus Christ. If you do not perceive that Jesus Christ is God, very well, then I did wrong to make you a general."
Well, yeah, that's the quote I was thinking of. So it's interesting. Maybe somewhere on the line, Napoleon changed his outlook, but
he certainly wasn't openly hostile to the Catholic Church. Not nearly. No. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But it's jumping off Russia, though, the idea between Holy Mother Russia and the Republican atheism, we see one of the things we need to talk about first before we get to the Russian Revolution is Russia is a perfect test case for which system of life is better, atheism or Christianity, because it's the same country. And within a period of 10 years, say from 1914 to 1924, Russia has completely changed from a Christian country to a communist country. And since it's the same country with the same people, it's almost a perfect test case that we do not often get in history. And if we look at the one of the common or one of the popular statisticians of genocide is R.J. Rummel, and he's been a popular figure in compiling statistics of well, he calls them democide because he includes not just race but religion and other groups who have been killed. And he says that in the Russian government and the Tsarist government in the 20th century may have killed 1 million people. And he says it's probably inflated, but he says that's his number he's giving. And if we include the previous Tsars and their tyrannical oppression, like under Ivan the Terrible, we might be able to add another 1 million or 2. So let's say, liberally 3 or 4 million might have been killed through political repression by the Tsars over a period of 1,000 years.
To be fair, though, you do have to look at it proportionally and technologically. The fact that obviously the population of Russia was much, much smaller back then, and the fact that the reason why you couldn't actually have massive totalitarian governments before the 20th century is that the technological apparatus of society, or the technological advances, wouldn't have allowed it. Like, even under the most despotic, absolutist monarchs in 18th century Europe, the average person was not going to really encounter much with the government aside from taxes. The fact is, once you get surveillance, once you get and the fact of modern government bureaucracy, then you can get totalitarianism. So I think that actually does also have something to do with the much higher number of deaths under the Soviets.
Yeah, I partially agree and partially disagree. I mean, as far as creating large death tolls, all you need is a blunt instrument like a machete. The Rwandan genocide demonstrated that with just machetes, you could kill hundreds of thousands of people in a few months. And the Mongols and the Huns demonstrated that as well. But the point taken is without the modern apparatus of control of technology, this couldn't have happened. And that's true to an extent. But this is why that 10-year period between 1914 and 1924 is so important, because that literally was the same apparatus. Lenin and Nicholas had the same apparatus of government. Yet Lenin was a genocidal maniac and Nicholas was not. Even the worst Tsar, Ivan the Terrible, was nowhere near as lunatic and genocidal as Lenin. But back to the same apparatus. They have the same apparatus, the same weapons, the same technology. The Russia of 1918 was not that different from the Russia of 1914, except that it had been devastated in a world war. And the Soviet Union killed between 20 and 60 million people, depending on your estimates. Now, the 20 million figure comes from Robert Conquest in the 1960s. He argued that given that we didn't have access to Soviet archives yet, that was the best estimate we come up with. He said it was probably lowballed, and since has revised that figure after the release of Soviet documentation, saying it's closer to 40 million. And that's including Stalin and I think Lenin as well. So the point is, though, the scale of devastation wrought upon Russia by the Lenin and Stalin, as compared to all of the czars put together, it's an order of magnitude so great that it's just unimaginable compared to before. And go ahead.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate, couldn't a lot of that, however, be attributed not necessarily just to their to them crushing their political opponents, but also to the sheer incompetence of having a communist government? The fact that you could that the only time the Soviets could ever actually feed themselves was when Lenin was forced to partially privatize the farms. After that, when all the farms were when you had all the collective farms, the fact is the Soviets could never properly feed themselves, even though they were in possession of one of the greatest open farmlands in the world. The Ukraine was basically the breadbasket of Europe. And it was even to the point where they had to reluctantly start purchasing grain from the United States during and after World War II.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say that the process of collectivization itself, especially under Stalin, was calculated to massacre millions of people. The Ukrainian Holodomor, where 10 million Ukrainians died in about the span of 2 years, that was intentional by Stalin. He intentionally wanted to punish these people for their separatist attitudes that they had seen in the 1920s when they tried to secede from the Russian Empire.
I mean, I know that. I mean, I know obviously it was intentional, but I mean, I think a lot of the other deaths were also because of the starvation, was also due to incompetence.
Well, I'm counting that and the gulags and the show trials and the mass arrests. The famines there were some famines under Lenin. The one could argue that was due to the Civil War, the fact that everybody's blowing each other away and there's no one working the farm, which is, okay, that's possible. But the fact is, even under Lenin, he just stole all the food. He just appropriated all of the people's food and gave it to the cities. He had to stop doing that because he had a third front on the Civil War open up with the peasants, and he couldn't fight the whites and the peasants at the same time. So he stopped confiscating their property, and so Stalin waited until the opportune time to confiscate all their food. They basically only wanted to feed the cities for mass industrialization. They had this insane idea that if you starve the population, the farmland, to feed the cities, you're going to develop your country. It's just this insane mentality. But I mean, I don't know. We see it in China as well. You know, Mao Zedong declared war on the sparrow because he claimed the sparrow was a pest. And in so doing, real pests like locusts and grasshoppers ate up all the Chinese food. So they had to, which contributed to the Great Famine of the Great Leap Forward.
I mean, you even same thing with China is the whole kind of part of the Cultural Revolution is, or the idea of industrialization is to convince all the peasants to take all their iron and steel, pots, their woks, and all their farming tools to melt all that down to make steel. Well, first off, the steel was absolutely horrible quality, and now you're just left with a bunch of peasants that don't have any farming tools.
Or crockery either. But but the point is, though, the fanatical terrorism of state-sponsored atheism, even if we control for technology, like we look at the Tsar in the 20th century, or the Imperial Chinese Empire, or even the Chinese Republic under Chiang Kai-shek, none of those regimes, they all had the same machinery of despotism, the technology, the weapons, and yet they didn't use it in that way, which demonstrates that it's not purely a technological question, but it's a spiritual question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great art. I mean, even look at Francisco Franco in Spain. Yeah, he was a totalitarian dictator, and he was a Catholic. He was a practicing Catholic, unlike how it's extremely questionable with Hitler and Mussolini, who was an atheist. But with Franco, you actually do have somebody who is a practicing Catholic, and not to my knowledge, there wasn't. I mean, obviously there was plenty of repression, but there was never outright genocides going on in Spain.
Exactly. Even in the ancient regimes of France under the Bourbons and Russia under the Romanovs, as bad and as corrupt and ineffective as it might have been, it was never genocide. They never decided, hey, we're just going to kill everybody we get a hold of who disagrees with us. And it's, whether you're your class or your race, and it's like, see, that's another thing. With the modern atheist totalitarianism, you say, you know what, okay, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to fight you anymore. I'm going to join your side. No, if you are a Christian or a kulak or a Jew or a Muslim or part member of the intelligentsia or a foreigner, you're going to die no matter what. There's no possible way to placate these people. You are their almost racial enemy.
I mean, yeah, with a few exceptions, just to, again, play the devil's advocate, you did have the kind of reemergence of religion during World War II in the Soviet Union. And there were dialogues and kind of cooperation between members of the Russian Orthodox Church and the Soviet state, but those were far more. But I would argue those were much more because of political expediency at the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, when Patriarch Tikhon during the revolution, the stuff that I think something like in 1917 there was something like 3,000 bishops in the Russian Empire. By 1940 there was like 3. I mean, it was unparalleled. I mean, even Islam conquering the Christian Roman Empire didn't get rid of bishops that quickly.
Yeah, I mean, again, political expediency is one thing, but their actual goals were clearly state atheism and get rid of all religion, which And because the thing is, I remember watching. There was a debate I watched one time a while ago between Peter and Christopher Hitchens, and they were debating God. And Christopher Hitchens, in his usual fashion, was saying basically that the Soviet Union, the apparatus of Soviet government, was still actually basically the Orthodox Church. They were still using much of the same, elements of the Orthodox Church in government to achieve their goals. So they weren't really an atheistic state. Well, no. The thing is, yeah, they were the only thing. The apparatus they were using was only similar to the Tsarist absolutism. They just ramped it up a few notches. And to claim that the Soviet Union was anyway, amicable towards religion was ridiculous, or that the fact that they were actually a religious state. No.
Well, exactly. Since you mentioned Christopher Hitchens, I find it interesting that Christopher Hitchens was unable to understand that when he wanted to say how bad God was, he said God would be a divine North Korea, somehow escaping his mind that North Korea is an atheist hellhole.
Exactly.
But however, Hitchens had that brain fart. I think the one thing that needs to be pointed out as a takeaway from the Soviet Union is that the Soviet Union implemented the most efficient, extensive, and soul-crushing system of slavery ever known to mankind, called the Gulag. And in Solzhenitsyn's epic trilogy, The Gulag Archipelago, he details in minute, excruciating detail the suffering and pain that millions of people went through over a period of 40 years.
Yeah, I do. I like Solzhenitsyn. I've read A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. But the thing is, he's even quoted with saying that, before the Russian Revolution, if you'd ask people what was wrong with the world or what was wrong with everything, the old men would go, well, it's because men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. And Solzhenitsyn continues with saying, and I can say after 50 years of research of the Russian Revolution, of Soviet Union and all this, that the most true statement about it is men have forgotten God. This is why all this has happened.
Yeah, exactly. And this kind of fanatical terrorism we see was not a product of Stalin. There's often this myth that there was, Lenin was the good communist. Stalin hijacked Lenin's movement, and Lenin really wouldn't have done these terrible things that Stalin did. This is an excerpt from the Rohrberg Commission of Inquiry, which was an allied. See, during the Russian Civil War, the French, the British, and Americans intervened ostensibly to help the whites, keep Russia in the war.
I mean, there's images of American troops marching through Vladivostok.
Yeah, exactly. But this commission, when they go to Odessa and look at the Cheka interrogation center, they say all the cement floor of the garage was filled with blood. The blood was no longer flowing. It formed a layer of several inches. It was a horrible mixture of blood, brains, and pieces of skull, of tufts of hair and other human remains. All the walls were bespattered with blood, pieces of brains, and scalps sticking to them. A gutter 25 centimeters wide and 25 centimeters deep and about 10 meters long ran from the center of the garage, sort of subterranean drain. The gutter along its whole length was filled to the top with blood. And then it says, here we discovered some bodies, traces of cruelties and humiliations of most varied and unimaginable. Some bodies were disemboweled, others had limbs chopped off, and some were literally hacked to pieces. Some had their eyes put out and their head, face, and neck and trunk covered with deep wounds. This is the kind of stuff you read about the Mongol conquest of China or the Huns' invasion of Europe. Happening in a quote-unquote modern country is just, in 1919, a year after officially the World War I ended, it's really unimaginable. I mean, the libertarian Ludwig von Mises pointed out that communism was really, and many other Western individuals like him, called it a reversion back to our primitive barbarian past of the Mongols and the Huns. Communism was seen as a kind of atavistic return to the nomadism of Scythians and Mongols.
I mean, the thing is, you could even make because I do believe in this partially, the fact that the Soviet state was somewhat a continuation of Russian absolutism as under the Tsars, because if you look, because the thing is, the Romanov dynasty, the Russian Tsar dynasty of Muscovy has its roots back in the Mongols, because before the Mongols came, Russia, when Russia was a series of a number of different city-states like Tver, Novgorod, of course, Pskov, and Kiev. they were relatively actually democratic. Many of them were republics. Novgorod, was the most famous. Was a princely noble republic, and it had, it was a fairly westernized state as well. And the fact that, they had something called the Swedish court, where, you had foreign merchants from Western Europe. There were cities in Russia were part of the Hanseatic League. And then you have the Mongols come over and take over most of Russia. And essentially they just set up little client states. And one of them just happened to be Muscovy, which was, ruthless enough to actually to exploit and extort power and land from the rest of the states until Muscovy became strong enough to, take over the rest of Russia and kick out the Mongols. And so really just this continuation of Mongol savagery and Mongol despotism continued throughout the Russian Empire and into the Soviet Union.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that there's a lot of truth in that. Let me rephrase it. Political atheism is a kind of like an amplifier of man's darkest attitudes. Whatever dark attitudes a particular people have, whether it's towards greed or cruelty or the will to dominate, all of these are held in check by convention and religion. Atheism comes into a region, and then it destroys convention and religion and amplifies those values. So they are there prior to atheism, but the political atheist liberates it and harnesses it for their power.
Yeah, exactly. I would actually completely agree with this, and I think that whereas the state atheism of the Soviet Union and communist China and Cambodia very much demonstrate this in a very direct, explicit way. The thing is, you can also look at the same thing of how secularism in Western countries also operates in a similar method of the fact that the social mores we have that are largely derived from our reliance on the ethics coming from Christianity are being eroded. The sexual deviancy and breakup of the family are largely due to the abandoning of Christian values. The fact is the two-parent family of with the father as the head of the family is a social construct. It is something that human beings have artificially created. That is not something that would be found in the natural state, because is in the natural state would be a harem culture in which based on the idea of evolution, the fact that you have a small number of alpha males that are getting a large portion of the women. And so that means polygamy and a harem culture will form. But instead, with Christian morality, where you have the insistence on having monogamy with both sexes, it forces women and men to only have one partner. And this creates a much more stable society, and it creates a much better lot for women as well, because now they're not treated, because Ben McLean, he had a great video about this, or a great video against Julie Bindel saying that that marriage is horrible and is bad for women, whereas the argument is the exact opposite of this, that marriage actually prevents women from becoming a commodity.
Yeah. The other thing, segueing back to the new atheists, the kind of ridicule and sort of like soft oppression that they do on religious individuals is very much like the Soviet League of the Militant Godless. And where the League of the Militant, no, they would actually attack people and do acts of vandalism, which as of yet, the new atheists haven't done. But it's the same mentality. It's the same mindset. And as you said, if they took power, give them enough time, and they would probably turn to the Soviet Union anyhow.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the thing is, like, you listen to people like Stargun or whatever, it's like, they always talk about how they were for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, but they're always extremely reluctant, if not outright, never will talk about the idea of religious freedom. And the thing is, like, if you look at places like the, organizations like the ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, and all these, secular left-wing organizations in America, the fact, or, the freedom from religion or humanist societies or whatever, like they purposefully go around the country and look for any sort of public expression of religion, whereas whether it's like a public school having a Bible verse on its billboard or whatever, or a Christian baker's obviously refusing to bake a gay wedding cake, they will seek these people out and they will use the apparatus of law we have right now to bully them and punish them for going against atheism and secularism. So they're trying to get the same outcomes. They're just using different tactics. They're working because they don't want to go outright and break the law. they're going to use the law to achieve their own ends.
Exactly, but once they control the law, then they won't need to break it to hurt people, because they'll be the ones writing the laws. But this whole militant atheism goes back to Leon Trotsky. This is from 1940. He says, "There is no anemic agnosticism at the core of their revolutionary philosophy, but militant atheism. How could they have any personal tolerance toward religion, which was inexorably linked to everything against which they fought at constant risk to themselves?" So it's, exactly. This is the new atheists are Trotskyists. They literally play from the Trotsky rule book. They're just not willing to risk their own life for the revolution, which I guess makes them cowards, because at least Trotsky did risk his life for the revolution.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as, like, this is best shown in like a video or in a channel like Atheism is Unstoppable, where all they do is bully and ridicule religious people. And I always love the kind of fallacy I made up called the Bronze Age myth fallacy, where you'll often hear a new atheist say that, oh, all religion is stupid, dogmatic, Bronze Age myths, or you believe in something called Sky Daddy. It's basic ideological bullying tactics to just make religion seem so unpalatable without actually addressing it.
Yeah, it's like when the 19th century Marxists said the priests were, in league with the governments and corporations to delude people to work in the factories and die for the kings. I mean, they didn't prove anything. It was just an attempt to discredit it.
I mean, the new atheism, it's very much influenced by Marxism. It's very much, I always try and assert that it's very akin to the rest of the progressives, like feminists and the Black Lives Matter people, because, the new atheists have their own version of, the bourgeoisie. It's religious people. They create the boogeyman. They create the, the idea that religious people or Christian conservatives in America are kind of this upper class, this kind of dominant class that, oppresses everybody else. And, that, they're the proletariats, and they want to overthrow this idea, the concept of a Christian America. But exactly, and it's like, you even, like, a lot of times in media or something, the Christian character will be either psychotic, or there'll be something very wrong with them. It'll show like their religious beliefs are a hindrance to them rather than a help to them.
Oh yeah, definitely. But to go back, I want to touch on communist China quickly. The level of savagery in the Soviet Union was a rational, calculating savagery. The savagery of communist China, North Korea, and Cambodia was not rational. It was an atavistic, animalistic savagery. If we look at the 1950s, when Mao was killing all the landlords and consolidating his control of China, or Pol Pot's Year Zero in Cambodia, or the Cultural Revolution in China, where they just went around shooting, people that were university professors, or, i.e. they wore glasses, as you could tell, or they were, they owned their own business. They were small business owners. They were landlords. They were, clergymen. And they just went around and Cambodia, Pol Pot killed about a third of his population. And he killed the best and the brightest. He didn't kill primarily, he killed a lot of peasants, but he wiped out the university elite. And Mao did something similar in China. In the Cultural Revolution, they went around, students would kill their professors, rat them out to the Red Guard. I mean, it's just kind of and as we talked about, the modernization schemes, killing off sparrows, or burning, melting down your cooking pans in the metal. I mean, this is really irrational now.
It is. It's hysteric, and it's cult-like. It's very much cult-like. Like, the whole Mao's Little Red Book, and the fact of, getting the young people kind of to rise up against their parents who did nothing wrong to them. The fact of, it's very much the idea of, 2 legs are, 4 legs are good, 2 legs are better mentality, that, you get everyone into this cult-like environment where, since they've abandoned God, since they've abandoned, in the case of China, all their kind of, the traditional Chinese folk religions and Confucianism and Taoism, Buddhism, you now get them to, what do they have left? But to follow the leader, and they'll follow him to do anything because they have an unwavering loyalty to him. Well,
you see here, that's a good point. You see, atheism is the denial of reason itself, because Christ is reason. He's logos. Denial of Christ is the denial of reason. And we see with each decade, the atheists become more and more insane, more and more irrational. Lenin and Stalin were calculating and rational, but Mao and Pol Pot were just completely, like you said, hysterical. They were maniacs. And, you know, the modern day new atheists, again, they're not rational like, say, Bertrand Russell was, or H.G. Wells was, or these, you know, atheists of yesteryear, or even someone like a Carl Sagan. I mean, these people have more akin with the Maoist and Pol Pot zealots than they do with Lenin or Marx.
I mean, you find that they often don't do a lot of their own thinking, because you can very much like say, like there was a great kind of like a thing with Milo, Steven Crowder, and Christina Hoff Sommers when they spoke at a university, and Steven Crowder, of course, famously going off on, just completely going off on all the SJWs in the campus. He explicitly said, none of these ideas are yours. They're what your social justice professors told you to think. And it's really the same thing with atheists. For them, instead of like a large mass of academic professors, they basically just follow the exact teachings of Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens. These aren't really their own ideas. They're ideas they took from other people, and those people were completely wrong.
Oh, exactly. The other thing is, what the new atheists, the Western atheists will say is, okay, well, let's look. Soviet Russia was bad. The French Revolution had some bad elements. The Chinese Revolution was bad. Mao was bad. Pol Pot was bad. But we liberal, Christopher Hitchens once famously said, said what society based on modern Enlightenment values, i.e., Jefferson and Locke and the American principles, have led to these terrible things. Well, there's a genocide at the root of that too. There's the infamous Adam and Eve letter written by Thomas Jefferson during the French Revolution, when it looked like they might lose. He said, "I would rather have a proverbial Adam and Eve left in every country, left over after the revolution, that the revolution should fail." So he's basically saying a global genocide would be better than the failure of revolution. This is Thomas Jefferson.
Which, honestly, I can link this to a lot of what I consider democratic supremacism. I mean, this is a bit off topic, but it's the fact that the liberal democracy that is the world, which is exemplified in Pax America, the American hegemony today, is very much ideological. The fact is, going back to World War I, it was largely an exercise in trying to eliminate any opponents to democracy. You had Woodrow Wilson. I mean, yeah, his reasons for going to World War I, which were much more economic, but he did give an ideological reason, the famous make the world safe for democracy, even though Germany was not a threat to anybody.
Well, exactly. The other thing is,
it's the ideological supremacism of these new atheists thinking that, okay, the worldview that we have now, the secular liberal, social liberal worldview we have now, is right. It's always going to be right, and it's the only way society can ever be structured.
Well, exactly. It's the atheist version of Fukuyama's The End of History. But the other thing is, when Hitchens said, "Name me any mass killings," I guess Christopher Hitchens never talked to any Native Americans who had their land stolen at gunpoint, but whatever. So, or the Germans who got destroyed in World War I, or the Japanese who got nuked. So, I mean, I guess he didn't ask those people. But I think the important thing here is that in the 1930s, there was a disturbing trend in Western atheist intellectuals, that was clearly genocidal in its intentions. Bertrand Russell, the overpopulation then as now was a huge issue for liberal intellectuals, atheist intellectuals. And in his 1951 book, I think it was, The Impact of Science Upon Society, this is what Russell says. "War, as I remarked a moment ago, has heretofore been disappointing in this result, the result being population control. But perhaps bacteriological war may prove effective. If a Black Death could spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. There would be nothing in this to offend the conscience of the devout or to restrain the ambition of nationalists. The state of affairs might be somewhat unpleasant, but what of it? Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's." George Bernard Shaw wrote, "You must know a half a dozen people at least who are of no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put them in there and say, 'Sir,' or 'Madame.' Now, will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't, justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight, and since you won't, if you're not producing as much as you consume or a little more, then clearly we cannot use the organizations of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us, and it can be of no very much use to yourself.
I mean, exactly.
We should find ourselves committed to killing a great many people who are now living. A part of eugenic policies would finally land us in an extensive use of the lethal chamber. A great many people would have to be put out of existence simply because it wastes other people's time to look after them. These are liberal, humanist, atheists contemplating mass genocide and advocating it as a positive future goal.
I mean, yeah. The problem is that, you know, this utilitarian ideology that I think that originated with the progressives and with liberal atheists is the fact that, you know, it's not looking at human beings as individuals anymore. It's inherently illiberal if liberalism can be defined as having an individualist concept to it, because the fact is, you know, you could say, yeah, in the long run, killing a huge amount of people will do good for the greater good, do good for the group. But the thing is, you're discounting the fact that these are individual human beings with, you know, families and, you know, a life, and you're not considering them to be actual individuals. Whereas, you know, with a theistic worldview, you do actually look at people as individuals, as human beings, because the fact everybody bears the image of God. Everyone is the imago Dei.
Well, exactly. And this little quote came to bite Shaw in the butt after World War II. Appealed to chemists to discover a humane gas that will kill instantly and painlessly. Deadly by all means, but humane, not cruel. And that is exactly the kind of gas that Eichmann was using. Like, there you go, man. That's so. I mean, these kind of liberal atheists ended up creating the ideological foundation for Adolf Hitler. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
I think the point is that atheistic humanism and empiricism and consequentialism and utilitarianism all have this fundamentally genocidal bent, that if you apply these ideas consistently and, you know, give up your Christian heritage that you really have no right to hold to, as Nietzsche points out in Twilight of the Idols, you're going to end up in this place pretty much no matter what.
I mean,
the
whole part of this is what all this leads to is an inhumane humanity. It's a humanity devoid of culture, devoid of religion, devoid of anything that's aside from basic utilitarianism. And essentially, and then even worse is ultimately if you get to the point of having an atheistic worldview, which you point out in your first podcast on this, that, you know, if you accept that life has no meaning, it will ultimately become suicidal. And so, you know, because atheism is inherently destructive. This ideology is always going to be extremely destructive. The fact that you want that it will eventually strip away culture, it will strip away religion, it'll strip away the idea of the family, and ultimately it will strip away human life itself, because you come to the conclusion that life has no meaning. So what's the point of living?
Well, exactly. And in the West, we do have a mass genocide going on. It's called abortion. The atheist, humanist liberals have redefined what a human is. And see, they say, well, at the beginning of life, you can't think, you're not viable, whatever, so we can kill you. And then now euthanasia is coming on the scene, so they'll probably kill off grandma and grandpa in the not too distant future because they got Alzheimer's and can't stop drooling. And so, well, now you just wiped out the bottom and the top of the human population. I mean, that's active genocide right now.
And yeah, and it's only going to continue unabated. If unabated, the idea of just trying to create an Übermensch, a humanity that is the only people that should be allowed to live are the people that are going to actually be useful.
Well, exactly, because what happens is when you define grandma and grandpa as not being human because they have Alzheimer's or dementia, and when you define, you know, little Johnny as not being human because he's, you know, a 3-month-old fetus or a 1-year-old, you know, even Peter Singer said you can kill 1-year-olds. Infanticide. Well, then, what stops the redefinition? The Soviet Union said you weren't human if you didn't accept the Marxist doctrines. The Nazis said you weren't human if you were a Jew. I mean, where do we draw the line? I mean, maybe you're next, you know, whatever you are. as a atheist, liberal, humanist, whatever particular class, race, gender you are might be the next one that gets defined out of existence, and they eventually squeeze you out till you don't exist anymore.
I mean, again, atheism is unstoppable. Like, it demonstrated this perfectly by going, all right, if you're not an anti-theist, I hate you. You're part of the outgroup. I don't, you have to actively be part of my group. You have to be, it creates, again, this in-group, out-group identity. The fact is, no, that was my point. Go ahead.
Well, another thing about that video that you did about the atheism is unstoppable, he's had a lot of videos about how it's, defending white people against the white guilt. But that's the same thing. He's white, and that race is being defined out of humanity. So he supports my position in both senses, because he's complaining that white men are being defined out of the context of humanity, and so it's allowed to discriminate against them without any limitation. And this is exactly what would happen if atheists take over, because what's human is purely arbitrary, and if you're not a human, we can kill you.
Exactly. No, I keep forgetting what I was going to say, but
no, but yeah, you see that, the anarchists and the libertarians who are atheists will say, well, but this isn't fair. We're atheists, we're libertarians, and we're anarchists, and we're atheists. Yes, but you also support abortion, which by default is genocide. So you differ from your big daddy brother Mao and Stalin only in degree, but even then, abortion's killed a lot of people. So you might beat Stalin not too long.
I mean, you even have the problem with the alt-right. You have a lot of, one of the sickest things I ever read is when you have somebody from the alt-right saying that, abortion's good because it kills disproportionately a lot of black children. Like, that's
the pro-life trap. Remember that article, The Pro-Life Trap?
No.
That was on Radix Journal. Had a huge shitstorm over that one.
But I mean, the thing is, yeah, I mean, progressivism and atheism will be fundamentally genocidal if they get their way. The fact, they say, hey, because I think fundamentally when we're talking about these, the genocidal tendencies of both atheism and, the communist atheist regimes of China and Soviet Union, North Korea, is the fact that, the new atheists will always claim that, hey, religious society organized under religion is terrible, it's backwards, it's immoral, and all this stuff. Yet, look at every society that's organized under atheism, and it's a million times worse. I mean, you have the explicitly destructive and genocidal ones under the communists, but you have the implicitly destructive ones under, secularism in the West, where you have abortion, you have the breakup of the family, you have the kind of disintegration of social cohesion. So, it's just two sides of the same coin.
Oh, exactly. In fact, when I want to go back to something you said earlier about the cultural void of atheism. It's what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man, that the fascists, the communists, the Democrats all believed in the same values, the same inhuman values. That would just ultimately destroy, not only abolish the idea of man, but actually man himself. Man will be killed. I mean, the radical environmental movement is the logical conclusion of all this. Mankind itself is the problem, and mankind itself must be destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And the thing is, organized religion, or Christianity especially, fixes a lot of this. And I think it not to be to offend the Muslims, but the fact that unlike Islam or God can't be referred to, because the thing is, Christianity has an explicitly kind of human element to it. Everything is actually about, so much of it is about it's all about the relationship between God and man, and the fact that God is our Father. He's not just some distant divine being that really doesn't care about us, and the fact that the story of the Garden of Eden, it's explicitly about man's fall, and then of course that's followed up by the resurrection, the idea that God has not abandoned us, that he sent his only son to save us all, and the fact that from the teachings of Jesus, it's the idea that when he says when he comes to judge us, when the son of when he will come to judge us, he'll say to those that have I knew you not, that I was hungry and you gave me no meat, I was naked, you gave me no clothing. The idea, the idea of humanizing everybody, looking at people as, have everyone as having an explicit value, is an inherently Christian one.
Yeah, exactly. But as you said about culture, the thing is, what culture do atheists have? They have no culture. I mean, if you look at the Soviet Union or communist China, I mean, and you compare that to like the music the architecture, the sculpture, the literature from the 19th century Europe. I mean, and then just that 100-year period, ignoring everything else for the moment. And then look at what the modern West, the Soviet Union, nothing. It's just a complete desert. You've just like shot all the artists and composers and novelists, and you're not going to train any new ones. It's just completely wiped it out.
The other thing is, in the West, it's very much kind of like Brave New World, where culture seems to only going to become based on the idea of pleasure. That's why something like Game of Thrones is so popular, because it has so much sex and violence in it. It appeals to these very base desires of humanity. Whereas,
I know, and in real life, most of the fans are guilty white liberals who, in real life, chimp out over these things. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And even worse is the fact that they can't relate, because you cringe when you hear them trying to talk about how they can solve Islam, where they believe that they can secularize Islam because, hey, look, we found a few former Muslim atheists. Like, no, you can't answer atheism with atheism, because that's like you're throwing an empty balloon at them. It's nothing. The only way Christianity could actually, the only way that the West could have a genuine response to the Islamic question would be to respond to it with an inherently Christian response, because that is actually something. They're trying, because the thing is, the atheists, the secularists, they created a void in the West when they got rid of religion, and now Islam is starting to fill that void. And so they're now scratching their heads thinking of, and so what they want to do is, well, they want to get Islam out of the void by digging it deeper.
Well, exactly. You can't fight something with nothing. There's a great novel called The Brothers Ashkenazi. It's a novel about two Jewish brothers living in pre-World War I. I think it was Russia, in Poland. And one of the brothers becomes an industrialist, and they both convert to atheism one before their rabbi father dies, and one after the rabbi father dies. The one who converts to atheism before his rabbi father dies marries his brother's sweetheart to spite him. But she says over and over again throughout the book that you're just a rabbi's son. He's an atheist, but he has all the tics and behaviors and mannerisms of a rabbi's son. An atheist isn't something. He's a defective something else. If a Muslim becomes a Christian or a Jew becomes a Buddhist, there's a new culture they've joined. They've become something else. If a rabbi becomes an atheist, he's just a defective rabbi.
Yeah, very much so. And I agree. Atheism is literally it's nothing. But not only is it's not only nothing. It ultimately it's not only nothing in the terms of belief, but it becomes a nothingness in terms of culture and everything about you.
Oh, exactly. So we're about out of time. So do you have any final words before I close off?
Well, I think I would just that as I just said, is atheism is inherently always going to be a destructive ideology, that it can't create anything, it can't produce anything, it can't be an honest answer to anything. It can only destroy, and it's just the same as liberalism and progressivism is. Exactly.
So, in conclusion, I want to quote from Richard Pipes' Russia Under the Bolshevik Regime. Communism failed because it proceeded from the erroneous doctrine of the Enlightenment, perhaps the most pernicious idea in the history of thought, that man is a merely material compound devoid of either soul or innate ideas, and as such, a passive product of an infinitely malleable social environment. So, this is Todd Lewis, the host of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.